Welcome to episode 149 of Destination Linux. Can you believe we've done 149 episodes and people are still listening?
No.
This is a podcast about using, learning, educating, and sharing our passion for Linux and everything open source. Destination Linux is meant for all experience levels. So whether you're a brand new newbie who's still dual booting or the most advanced Arch user out there, you are welcome. Noah, what? Why are you shaking your head?
I'm just saying, Michael may or may not dual boot, and you may or may not use Arch. So it might sound like you're trying to make a statement. I don't know. I'm just saying.
No, there was no statement.
To be fair, he does dual boot. May or may not implies that yes, you're implying that yes because one is a yes, but the dual booting is not true. So that's clarify that again.
Listen, Michael, we don't want to get drugged down in the details here.
Yeah, I'm doing the intro. Can you guys quit interrupting?
Okay.
Sorry.
Anyway. I'm Ryan, and with me today are the Mandalorians of Linux, Noah, Zeb, and Michael. So, Noah, how has your week been, sir?
It has been awesome. I was a guest speaker at the university to talk about security, and so we gave a presentation on that and had some really interesting questions and some really interesting follow-up discussion. And it was interesting. My son came, and I kind of thought that he was out and going to play on his laptop. Come to find out, he was taking notes. And so we get home, and he's like, "So could you explain how do I generate a GPG thing?" I'm like, "Really?" And so then I spent the next hour with him at home, teaching him about encryption and symmetric encryption and asymmetric encryption and proper key management and those kind of things. We set his YubiKey up to do PAM, and yeah, it was a good time. And I guess
I wonder if at any point he was sitting there going, "God, I wish I never asked Dad this question, and I could be playing my Switch right now."
I doubt it, because he, it was constant follow up, right? Like he would ask something, and I would think I explained it enough, and then he would ask another question, or he'd dive a little further until he went to bed. So
that's awesome.
I think it was. I think really the lesson I took away from that is, as a parent, sometimes we underestimate our kids, and it relates to technology, they're just sponges, man. They just soak it up. So don't underestimate them.
Absolutely. So the security conference specifically, was there a topic that you covered?
Wasn't a conference. Yeah, it wasn't a conference. It was just the university asked me to come out there, and our local lug it meets at the university, and so we did it kind of a hybrid thing. We did it as part of the lug, but we did it at the university and invited other people from the community to show up. Yeah, it was fun. I think what that's going to evolve to is because like I said, I had some good discussion. I had some interesting questions, and as conceited as this is going to sound, it was enlightening and refreshing to me that there were people that came that hadn't heard of the show and just came because they were interested in general security. But what this is going to lead to is I would really like to get to a point where I'm doing presentations, maybe monthly or maybe every 6 months, and inviting other people around in their communities to go out and talk to people about using Tor, using Tails, using full disk encryption, basic privacy habits, using DuckDuckGo as a search engine, and speaking to people that they're not Linux advocates, they're not open source advocates, they're just day-to-day people, but want to know how to keep their information private and don't know how to do so. And I think that could be a really valuable thing if we could get that working. So I would like to do more of that if I can.
Very cool stuff. So we got a question from Povok in our chat regarding the security, since you mentioned it. He says, if I generate a GPG key now and get a YubiKey at Christmas, can I put that key on the YubiKey, or does the YubiKey require you to generate one specific for the device? No. And I'm pretty sure you can import that in.
Correct.
Yep.
However, you would not want to store the whole idea behind the YubiKey is that it never gives up the private key. So for that, to take advantage of that security apparatus, you would want to make sure to destroy the GPG key. So the process I would recommend is create an encrypted partition or use a fully encrypted disk drive, create your GPG key, import it to the YubiKey, and then destroy the GPG key file in the form of erasing the disk and destroying the passphrase used to encrypt the disk. The reason for that is, if you left a file copy of your GPG key, theoretically somebody could obtain a copy of that and use it surreptitiously. If it's only stored on the YubiKey, it's impossible for anybody to ever duplicate that GPG key. And of course, then for backup purposes, I would have a different GPG key that I would store in like a safety deposit box or something like that. And that way you've got two keys that you're using to encrypt something or decrypt something.
Yep, absolutely. So Zeb, tell us about your week.
Well, I'm a little confused because, first of all, I've never played a stringed instrument in my life. So why am I Mandalorian?
Sorry, I don't Are you not a Star Wars fan, Zeb?
Yes, but I still have no idea what Mandalorian.
Okay, so you're not one of the real fans. You're kind of the ones that's like, oh, a new film's
I
out.
would disagree that if we're going to go into a tangent if we talk about that, because I think the original three are the only ones that matter. The rest are all garbage. But anyway, continue.
How
exactly, yeah,
dare
the original
you?
three were
He's
the original three were the best.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
The prequel.
There's no character development. There's no real plot. It's just Jar Jar Banks jumping around.
Well, the current ones or the reboots or their continuation
Better.
or whatever are mediocre and they're okay, but
Yeah,
they're still
better.
bad. But they're like, but the
Yes.
prequels destroyed the franchise value
Yes.
so badly. It was like, who cares? Who
Yep.
Well,
cares?
the reality is, and what I think everybody with a brain can agree on, is Star Trek is superior to Star Wars. All right, so how has
Yes.
your week been, Jeff?
Well, it's been really busy at work, so I've not had a lot to do that's very productive Linux-wise. Although in the last couple of days, I have read an awful lot about Copa and YouTube. Calm down, Zeb. But we'll get to that later in the episode.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you actually keeping us up to date on that, because I kept seeing everybody talking about it, didn't quite really register everything going on. So you gave us some really good information that we'll cover later in the episode.
Yep.
I appreciate that. Michael, what's new in what have you not unboxed lately?
Wait, are you
It's
implying
still
that I
sitting
get?
on the shelf.
Okay, it's still technically, as is tradition, it's still there, but that's the monitor arm, by the way, that we talked about last week. But I actually been doing some, improving some various different things on the websites. I've actually modified the destinationlinux.org websites for improvements and various different things like that in the back end. But what's really interesting is that a couple days ago, I did a favor for my brother, which involved me driving many hours to get something for him because I'm a great brother. And
It sounds illegal already.
no, it's not illegal. Boring,
Okay.
yes, but not illegal. But the main thing is that when I did an impromptu live lug meeting on the way there with people on the DL group or Telegram and the DL Discord and other places. And I just sent a message like, hey, if anybody wants to chat, I'm stuck driving for a couple hours. So, hey, let's have a chat. And it was like a couple dozen people or so throughout the hours of time. It was like, wasn't all at once, but throughout that we had it was a fun conversation because it was like, what do I do after I've already listened to all the podcast and I still have hours to go? So I did an impromptu thing with everybody in the DL group, and it was awesome.
No, that is such a great idea. Honestly, I was jealous you thought of that, and I hadn't for all the many trips that I've taken. I mean, just to pop in a room, because conversation, if you have somebody in the car with you, you'll notice, I don't know anybody's had long commutes. The commutes go by so much faster. It feels like it just flies by. If you're sitting in a car by yourself, it goes on and on forever. So it's kind of a good idea to make the trip not seem so long, and also to talk to people about Linux, which, I mean, that's kind of what we do.
Yeah, it was awesome. So, Ryan, how was your week been?
So I was traveling all week. I was in Missouri this week, and it presented an interesting opportunity to take the Pinebook Pro on a trip, make sure it could survive TSA and all of their fun, and also put it to the test for getting the work done that I need to for this show, in preparation for the show and other things. Not surprisingly, the Pinebook turned out to work perfectly fine. Everything I needed to get done, I was able to get done. Had a lot of curious people around as well, wanting to see the laptop and figure out what it was and what I was using and that type of thing. So had a lot of good conversation. But you know how we're going to talk about a product later in the show where, they talk about all the things that it can do, and then it actually doesn't do those things, and it's a big disappointment. And the Pinebook Pro, I found out, has a feature that they didn't talk about, but it's a good thing, an extra feature nobody's mentioned. And I just found out about this today. So the laptop's sitting on my couch, and my son decides to catapult off the couch arm and onto the other couch, stepping on the Pinebook along the way, of course, to launch his weight. And the Pinebook Pro survived. And they don't list that feature anywhere on their website. But
Hold on.
Yeah.
Are you checking the specs?
Can confirm not in the FAQs.
Yeah, it's not in the FAQs anywhere that it is actually kid-proof. So it's actually, I was impressed. I thought, oh my gosh, when I saw him launch off it, that laptop is a goner. The first thought was, thank goodness it's only $199, but it's still $199. So, but no, it survived. There is no damage, no dent, no nothing. So it's a pretty sturdy little laptop, and it took some abuse being thrown into laptop bags and pulled out randomly on planes and getting bumped and all of that stuff. So it was pretty awesome. Also, while I was in Missouri, we got a chance to do some charity work, building boxes of goodies to send to soldiers overseas, which was a highlight of the trip, and I enjoyed that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, well done, that man.
This episode of Destination Linux is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. It's optimized to make managing and scaling apps easy with an intuitive API, multiple storage options, integrated firewalls, load balancers, and so much more. And by the way, using the Pinebook Pro, I was able to do work on my DigitalOcean droplets no matter where I was, which is one of the advantages of having the Pinebook Pro, and of course DigitalOcean there, so that you can get all of this stuff, access to it from anywhere you are at. You can get all of this plus access to the world-class customer support for as low as $5 per month, or you can use their flexible pricing structure for as low as 0.7 cents per hour, and that's darn near free. DigitalOcean also has 2,000 cloud-agnostic tutorials. I have to believe it's got to be well over 2,000 at this point, but at least 2,000 of them out there, and with the latest, so you can stay up to date with the latest open source software languages and frameworks. Get started on DigitalOcean for 1 month free with a $50 credit by going to do.co/DL. Now, this is the important part because they help make this show a reality. They help support this show and have for a long time. So make sure you let them know that we sent you by going to do.co/DL. And you can get started with a $50 credit as a bonus there. And as always, we thank DigitalOcean for sponsoring this episode.
Hey everyone, before we get to the rest of the show, I wanted to take a brief moment to let you know about something we're doing for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. So this is not actually in the particular episode because we didn't think about it until, well, after we recorded the show. So unfortunately, it's just a ninja edit here so that it's got, in the video version, I'm just going to put some like random graphics about Black Friday and whatever. And so the Destination Linux Network is going to have a Black Friday sale and a Cyber Monday sale for the destinationlinux.network/store so that you can go there and get a coupon code. We haven't launched the coupon code yet on the store, so be sure to go there on Friday to get it and find out what that code is. So if you want to get some DLN merch and save some money while you do it, then go to destinationlinux.network/store on Friday. The beginning of Friday, we'll launch it, and it'll be there all the weekend until the end of Cyber Monday. So be sure to go to destinationlinux.network/store. Now let's get back to the show.
So on to our community feedback. And I think from the episode where we was all concerned about security, a listener wishes to remain anonymous. So I'd like to remain anonymous, please, if that's possible. Well, we'll have to read your email first to see if we've got any gripes against you. So he goes on to say, I'm really excited to send this email since I'm a big fan of the show since episode 91. So I listen to every show every single week whilst driving to class. I wanted to say a couple of things about the coming of Edge to Linux. The first being that, as Torvald said back in 1998, if Microsoft ever releases software on Linux, we've won. So yeah, we've won.
Nice.
The second comment is that since most of the software infrastructure that is used by the government in my country is heavily reliant on Microsoft products, since the XP days, it is impossible to use certain websites from Firefox or any other browser. God forbid if you use any other browser.
See, this person does listen to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So they have to use Edge or Internet Explorer. And that's a big problem if you want to ask for any certificates or do any other important operation at home. I know of many people that could benefit from this, and I'd leave behind their Windows VMs once and for all. And I will personally install it on my machine, or probably a VM. I just don't trust them. On another note, I learn a lot of stuff from this show, especially when you bring Bo and he talks about his networks and attacks. So keep up the good work. Greetings from Spain. By the way, I use POP.
See, and he still made it into the notes. So your theory that I only include Arch users in the show notes is completely wrong. Completely wrong. But I do have a love for POP as well. No, this is a great email. Thank you, first of all, for being a long-term fan. We appreciate that a lot. And these emails mean a lot to us.
Very much.
Because you surprise some of the other ones we get. On the on the on the thought about Edge and basically, well, I guess first on his thought about Torvald saying if Microsoft ever releases software on Linux, we've won. I think that's an interesting quote, and I wasn't aware that he had ever said that. But I think you can certainly say in many respects, Linux has won. We continue to grow and dominate in so many areas. And more when I walk out with my endless supply of Linux shirts, I get people saying things to me in public like, nice shirt, or I love Linux, or stopping me to talk about Linux. And I can tell you a couple of years ago, that never happened. People just looked at it, read it, and like, you see that confused look on their face. So Linux is getting out there more than ever before. And I think certainly, some of what Microsoft is doing has helped, but a lot of it just happens to be people being annoyed with the latest Windows 10 and having so many problems on their desktop, and that just sends customers our way. And the only other alternative will cost you $2,300 for a underpowered laptop, which is Apple. So, it's a pretty good option out there for people, and I think so many content creators out there as well, realizing there's such an audience for Linux, is helping in addition to that.
A quick question, because I'm sure I used to have it when I used to use Google Chrome. Isn't there a little add-on that you can spoof websites into thinking you're using Internet Explorer? And wouldn't that help him in his situation with his government websites? You
can do user agent switching, but they also they could do it in a local network structure where it doesn't use the user agent. It uses it has a thing on the computer testing to see if it's an actual whatever particular browser. So, and if they're doing it just on the website side, you could block it that way. But if it's doing it at work and you have their machines, they could put something in extra. But I think it actually is an interesting quote, and I was aware of it, and I also, I don't know if I feel about it, because it's they're releasing software for Linux, and Edge is not an example because Edge is not their software, it's Chromium. But I guess in a way that they did release a SQL server and some other stuff, so they did kind of release stuff for Linux. I think, but everything that they've released for Linux is for themselves, so I'm still they really haven't done anything that proves that they've kind of changed. But I think that Linux was one prior to that anyway, because we dominate everything other than the desktop and everything. So it's not an issue. In the chat, someone said VS Code was released, and it's yeah, but that's also based on Atom, which is not theirs either. So whatever.
VS Code's turned out to be a big win though, and I'm very happy we do have it on Linux. That would be that out of everything Microsoft's released, that's the one that is, to me, the most. I personally don't use it, but I have looked at it, and I think it's the most useful to developers and everyone else being able to have. And I believe Nate called into your show, Noah, to talk about this specifically about the fact that even at his workplace, he was able to use Linux because VS Code was on there. And that's kind of a required software package for everybody. So if people want to use Windows, great, they've got VS Code. But if you want to be on Linux, you've got VS Code there, and it's exactly the same. And that was a big deal for them. So I think VS Code's probably the best thing Microsoft has released for Linux so far, even though, like you said, it's based on somebody else's work. It's something that in the corporate world, in some jobs is required.
Yeah, so it's definitely good that we have that as an option now, because if there's people who require that type of a Microsoft suite, that we could use those things on Linux. And the fact that they're using a platform from someone else to build that software makes it easier for them to build it, but also makes it easier for them to support Linux because of it. So I guess in a way that it's not that it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just something to me, it's if you when they say something that they write something for Linux or release software for Linux, I think that requires them to actually have created the software themselves rather than taking something else and then putting something on top of it. I guess you could argue that since they bought GitHub, which created Atom and Electron, that they now own those things, but whatever.
Yeah.
Scott writes in to say, I love the show and I listen as often as I can. I've been a quasi-power Windows and Linux user for a long time. I'm nearly expert level in Windows and Linux dual boot capable, but for the life of me, I can't quite figure out how some Linux distributions play nice in the dual boot environment, yet others, no matter how carefully I set everything up, CentOS and sometimes even Fedora, blow away the master boot record. Windows is still there. If I just go back and install a well-behaved Linux distribution like KDE Neon, Ubuntu, or a few others, any suggestions? Otherwise, keep up the great work. What do you guys think?
So Noah, I mean, I'm curious. Well, I'm curious to you or Michael or even Zeb have some thoughts here. This has been a long time pain point for me, especially when I was moving distros all of the time, which is why last week, if you remember, I specifically brought up MX Linux install setup, in which they have a very specific section separated from all other sections of the install to say, okay, what do you want to do with Grub? Do you want to install Grub? Do you not want to install Grub? And if you do want to install it, where exactly do you want to put it? Now, every distro, technically, you can go in there and do advanced custom settings and set all of that stuff yourself up. But I have found, just like this user says, that certain distros, no matter what you put there, it's going to blow away Grub and blow away your other Grub or not find things. And you've got to either manually fix it. And it's just a major pain point, to the effect that one of the reasons why I got an IC dock was so that I could pop out every single drive in my computer, except for the one I'm installing the distro on, install the distro, and then put every drive back in and basically, do a refind on the Grub and have everything set up there. It's interesting he mentioned specific distros here. The one that to me is the absolute worst for this is Pop! OS, which uses system deboot, I believe. It will wipe out anything else standing in its way, and has been known for that for a long time as a complaint against Pop! OS, using the system deboot setup that they have. But I was surprised to see Fedora and CentOS here, because I haven't messed with CentOS very much, but Fedora I've not had that issue with very much. But there's probably something specific maybe you all know about of why some distros just seem to not care.
I want to point out, I just want to start by saying I find it very strange that CentOS is acting this way, as CentOS is, there are a few things that Red Hat concentrates on, but making sure the system boots would definitely be high on the list,
Yeah. Well, it'll boot. It'll just wipe everything else out.
Yeah. And I think in that particular regard, Fedora is very picky about the EFI partition that it wants to write to. And if there's already something in there, it says, oh, but I can't install to that. I'm sorry, you're going to have to format it. But if you format it, you're going to have to wipe it out. So specifically in this particular gentleman's use case, where he's got Windows there already, my suggestion would be to go into Windows and shrink the drive to as much room as you want to give to Linux. Then when you go into the installer of Linux, fire up gparted first of all, and give yourself a second EFI boot partition. Yeah. Once you're in gparted, turn the EFI boot flags off the Windows. It doesn't need those flags. It knows it's there. It will always use them. So now you have your Linux partition, your home partition, and a completely fresh EFI partition to point your installer to. When you then reboot, it will find Windows, it will boot up the OS you're using, and the Windows OS bootloader will be safe. Now, my machine is really stupid. I've got like 6 SSDs and I've got maybe 8 EFI partitions on there. But I know what each one does and what each one contains. So I'm safe from wiping out my Windows partition. But there are a lot of distros out there still that want to format your EFI partition. And that's when it all gets really, really dangerous.
That's a good tip.
So I've heard a lot of people talk about getting rid of Grub and that Refind is such a better option out there. I've not spent the time to play with it. Has anybody checked out any of these other alternatives?
I've played with Refind.
Yeah, it's a very nice graphical interface, but it will suffer the same problem as Grub. If you've got a very, very messy set of EFI partitions and Grub installs, I often find that it duplicates a lot of the entries. And you go, oh, well, hang on a minute. Which of these 2 Ubuntus that I've got is my real one and which was the one that got mucked up by someone else. So it's not tidy in that regard. And because a lot of people haven't played with it, I don't find it a very intuitive interface to try and fix. To look at, it's very, very pretty. There is an exceptionally good website if you can speak wiki. But we all know I don't speak wiki. But yes, you can get it installed, and it is a reasonable alternative. I just don't understand why people get upset when you say, well, why not have a systemd and Grub? It works, and it works really, really well. And if you want to press F8 or whatever the keyboard shortcut is on your machine and go into your system's EFI boot menu and pick your distribution, or wait for your favorite flavor of Grub to turn up, and in my case it's normally Manjaro, because Manjaro doesn't play well with other. If you try and run Manjaro from Ubuntu, you'll get a kernel panic because it's written in a completely different way. So why can't I then let the machine boot up to Manjaro's Grub and then pick the distribution I want? You've got the best of both worlds then.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I did the lazy way. I actually haven't dual booted in so long that I no idea how to do it anymore. Well, I mean, I remember the old ways, but I haven't done the Windows dual booting in so long because the FlexiDock that Ryan mentioned, I found it a long time ago, and I've been using it for like a couple of years now, and it is the seamless approach. If you have a desktop computer, if it's just on a laptop, you really can't do that. But if you have a desktop computer, check out the FlexiDock. I have a video on my channel about it if you want to learn more about it. It is such a smooth experience to dual booting or multi-booting or whatever.
And
is he just trying to kill the myth that he doesn't dual boot?
I think so. Did you see how many times he spent talking about not dual booting?
So I just want to point out that I appreciate, Zed, that you said myth, because you're correct. It is a myth.
Yeah, but it can't be a myth because you've just caused Noah's lights to go out.
Okay,
Yeah.
you did. I thought it was crazy for a second.
Spirit of Windows is after you. It just picked the wrong presenter. Sorry.
I love it. So Jeff writes in to say, hi, DLN guys. I'm a French-Canadian system developer and a network specialist from a little city in the middle of Quebec. I'm using Linux since the beginning of 2000, and I removed Microsoft out of my life for 10 years now. How awesome is that? How freeing that must be. I'm working mainly on Raspbian and Debian. I use Pop! OS for gaming and Manjaro on my new Pinebook Pro. First time using Arch-like distribution. Be careful, it's an addiction. You're going to be saying, by the way, I use Arch in no time straight. By the way, the Manjaro version for the Pinebook Pro has received some patches to fix some of the issues that it was having, and it is very much an alpha, and they say that everywhere. So these issues aren't like not to be expected, but they're fixing them very quickly, and it's turning out to be an absolute fantastic distribution for Pinebook Pro if you want to try something different on it. He goes on to say, I was working in farm automation with a Linux system, but after 6 years of development, the company I was working for chose to abandon my project to go with the Microsoft solution because getting a second Linux dev in our region was nearly impossible. So since last April, I'm searching for a new job as a Linux system dev, but can't find anything near my home. From now, I've learned the system dev part of my career and focus more on the networking part. So the question I have is there someone in the Linux community that needs a system developer that specializes in C, multi-threading kernel drivers with a degree in electronics? I can literally build a router from scratch, hardware and software. I don't want this part of my life to be lost because nobody needs it where I live. You that know a lot of Linux communities do know a place where I can put my knowledge to be more efficient for the Linux world. Continue to your great work and have a nice day, Jeff. So, Michael, this actually made me start thinking about one of the reasons why I wanted to start my lug group here in Georgia was because there were a lot of individuals talking to me personally about trying to find work. And they were a lot of people in the Linux community are highly intelligent individuals. And we have this Destination Linux network now, and we have this awesome forum. Is there some place on the forum we can create? And I literally have been gone all week, so I'm asking you on the show live for people who post jobs and things for if they need jobs or if they actually have jobs out there. Because I thought, what a great way. We have nearly, by the way, if you haven't joined the Telegram group, we have over 1,100 people in there now. Networking is a big part of getting a job. And that would be my first advice to tell you. You need to become a part of the communities out there. Mm-hmm. That includes electronic communities like our Telegram groups, other groups out there that deal in Linux. Because if you start making friends they'll have that random conversation. By the way, we're looking for so-and-so, and you'll be able to get a job that way, but also locally, joining local lug groups, joining local organizations where you can get involved and get to know people, because most of the good jobs, at least in my experience, 20 years being in corporate America, come by the way of networking. You know somebody who knows somebody, and that's how you get in. So that's my advice to your question, but I'm wondering if we could maybe add a section in our forums for people looking for jobs and people who are posting jobs that they may have for people.
Yeah, definitely. We can look into that. I mean, it's one of the things that I wanted to do for a while. So I think we should go ahead and like build something out and see what happens. But I think that's a great point. Networking is one of the best things to do. Like, especially if you can find like computer clubs, because you might not find like a Linux group or Linux company that's specifically for it, but they might not know that Linux is a solution in some companies. So they could search for a computer job that's relevant to that, and then have like in the interview you could talk to them about that, and they like, especially if it's a small company, they'd be more flexible in that sense. But there's many ways to do it, but networking in your local area as well as online is the best way to check it out. I think that we could definitely put a section on the forum, and hopefully that can help out as many people as possible.
There you go.
Here's my question to help him out a little sooner than as soon as possible. Is he interested in subcontracting? Because I may or may not know an IT company that's looking for somebody like that for a couple jobs.
Well, there you go.
Send us.
Call me.
Yeah, there you go. Send us an email. We'll follow up on that as well.
Beautiful. So we love hearing from our worldwide community, and today's couple of emails have proved that, from Quebec all the way to Spain. We have many ways for your voice to be heard. You can send us a short email or video that may get incorporated into the show. So please send your links or email, or your video links or your emails to comments@destinationlinux.org.
So first in the show this week, we're going to talk about Coreboot. We just talked about Grub and other boot systems, but this is kind of more of a BIOS replacement. And Coreboot, if you're not aware, Coreboot is a project looking to replace the proprietary BIOS firmware for a more secure open source alternative. And the project was originally called the Linux BIOS, but they changed the name for like that because Coreboot sounds a little bit better. And also doesn't specify that it's just for Linux, because that makes it possible for other operating systems to use it. So, for instance, the Linux Coreboot has like a G unzip the Linux kernel straight out of the NVRAM. This means there's a less bloat and there's a lot more speed for the booting system. And in addition, it means there's more free computer parts, so like they won't be restricted by manufacturers adding DRM blobs to keep you out, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of systems that are using this. There's a lot of different support that's coming in the next version. So the Coreboot 4.11 has support for Chromebooks, AMD Picasso APU, the AMD Padmelon is okay, reference board, the Lenovo ThinkPad T410, T440p, and many more. And there's also there's actually support for System 76 laptops that are using Coreboot now as well. So that's great. Some argue that even Coreboot, there are still things that like the Intel ME and AMD PSP, which is still available in like a lower level backdoor thing, but that's more on a hardware level rather than a firmware level. So I'm not sure if that's even possible for them to do anything except for maybe disable because I know some companies, some manufacturers are able to disable the IME, but I'm not really sure if there's how much you could do anything beyond that. But this is pretty interesting that they add some new support for different hardware, and also I like the fact that AMD is now pushing different weird terms like Padmelon. That's fun. Like what?
That's fun.
What is that?
So,
anyway,
I was fascinated by how many developers are now involved in Coreboot. So you had in this release 1,630 commits by over 130 developers on this. Wow. So if you were thinking that Coreboot may be one of those things that starts and then fizzles away like a Google product, you're wrong. Coreboot,
like a Google product.
Like it is here to stay. And the people who are naysayers, because I've seen this when System 76 made the announcement. I've seen this anytime Coreboot gets mentioned that, oh yeah, but there's still this vulnerability that could happen here or there, whatever. It's you got to stop moving the cone before we even have the cone in place. Mm-hmm. And this is a step in the right direction. Does it fix everything tomorrow? No, but unless there's a Power 9 based laptop out there for around the same price as every other laptop, that's not a viable solution. And at the moment, now doesn't mean we won't get there, but let's get this cone placed. Let's get this open source BIOS in place and be celebrating the companies that are utilizing it.
Yeah.
Then we can move the cone and say, all right, next step. Why don't we see if we can do this?
Right. And the problem is when you do that, you discourage anybody from ever wanting to work on it.
Yes. And it's a major problem because you have a lot of really smart security conscious people in the Linux world. And there's nothing wrong with the fact of thinking about, all right, what's the next step we need to take it? But the comments that I read are so negative. And by the way, if you're looking for a job, stop, because that stuff reflects negatively on you. But they're so negative and they're so angry about things that, and they're not wrong in their concept of, hey, you know, it could be more secure. It's just the way they go about it is discouraging to people. And we need to take baby steps here because we don't have a processor that is mass produced and at the right pricing right now to replace everything that's AMD and Intel and remove, although I don't know if anybody has real issues with AMD's PSP, but certainly Intel Me and things like that out there. So it will come, but I am super excited about Coreboot. And I think it's really cool that there's a lot of laptops out there right now that you can go put this in yourself. You can basically get this flashed onto your machine and you can start using Coreboot. And a lot of people seem to be, 130 developers is nothing to sneeze at. There's a lot of big distros out there that would love probably to have 130 developers working on their project.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a really good project, and I'm glad that and it's been around for a while, but I'm really glad that it's continued to get to the point where manufacturers are now shipping with it in some cases, like System 76 are shipping with Coreboot now. So and some of their devices. So that's awesome. So like even though there's there's a negative community aspect around it. Like I think it's even more impressive that they've able to just completely ignore that stuff and just push forward to make sure everything gets done, because it's something that needs to happen. And there's a lot of times where some projects will just give up because they have a lot of negative feedback, and I'm glad that this is not one of those projects.
Yep.
So on to some software news, and Firefox is sweetening the pot once again. So Firefox has announced some updates to its web security bounty program. Now, the first big chance is the increase to bounty payouts. Mozilla is now doubling the payment for all critical and core bugs. Then they are tripling payouts for remote code execution bugs to $15,000 for critical sites. That's $15,000. Awesome. That's just...
That could almost buy you a new MacBook.
Yeah, almost.
Or Michael, a new Windows machine.
Wow.
Mozilla states in their blog they're one of the first companies to establish a bug bounty program, and this is all a part of celebrating 15 years since Firefox 1 was released, along with assuring their program remains relevant and active. So now that pot of gold has grown, they've also grown the critical sites eligible for the payout, which includes in services like Autograph, a cryptographic signature service that signs Mozilla products; Lando, Mozilla's new automatic code landing service, which allows us to easily commit fabricated revisions to their destination repository, and a number of other sites that we'll have listed in the show notes. Finally, new core sites have been added as well, and the new payouts have already been updated to the reported web bugs. So if you're looking to make some cash for the holidays, there are some opportunities to turn your talent into a paycheck. So not to be outdone, Google has also announced a huge bounty increase from 200,000 max prize to $1 million. This is a 50% bonus for exploits found on specific developer preview versions of Android. So becoming a bug bounty hunter might turn out to be a very lucrative career choice with all this money and dough on the line. So question for you guys, what level of technical ability is it that a person has to have to go for these types of bug hunting jobs?
I mean, I think that the pots that are here are quite extensive. You know, we're talking about people needing jobs in the Linux world and being highly intelligent individuals. And, you know, I think you would have to have a good amount of talent to not only understand some of these bugs, but to fix them. You may get lucky, and there may be some easy ones out there that your average, not your average Joe, but somebody who's just semi-technical might be able to find. But this is a lot of money, and I would imagine that somebody could, if they were well versed in either Google Android or Firefox or browser exploits, could make some good money doing this as a job potentially, or at least a really good side gig here.
Yeah,
because this is some serious money.
Yeah, this is a developer thing, and also to be clarified that the 15,000 for the critical bugs is for 15,000 per bug. So if you just found 2 bugs, you're pretty much good to go in some areas and stuff. But I think that this is really good. This is a good possibility for people to get some like side cash if you're a developer, or if you know anything about security. And in the browser's case, there's different types of languages you can look into different issues. And I think, but it's not necessarily just dev stuff. I mean, you're more likely going to be able to get bug bounty stuff if you're a developer. You're going to be able to look at the code more and that kind of thing. However, I would like to point out there was a bug bounty that was found by I think an 8-year-old from Apple they found a big giant bug in FaceTime. So there's all kinds of potential.
Yeah. So interesting too. I would think Android would be the easiest one, and I'm not just doing that because I don't like Google. I mean, it just today, for instance, there was an article that released of over 1,000 apps that had vulnerabilities that were disclosed all the way back in 2014 that are still sitting on the App Store with those vulnerabilities on it. And they've been downloaded a total of 5 billion times since those exploits have come out. Wow. So there is
but those
a
are
lot.
Bug bounties for they're only, this is only bug bounties for Android itself. So basically,
my point is though that there's probably a lot of stuff that are old exploits.
Oh yeah,
that Google hasn't patched that are sitting out there that you might be able to make some quick money on.
Right. I was just going to say that if you wanted to do it, you could just take the link to the Play Store and send it to Google and say bug found.
I'm just going to send them the article and get my million. Yeah. No, this is really interesting way though for somebody. I think it could turn into a very lucrative career if you went out there and just did these bug hunts out there. I would think there's probably even the potential to create an organization around there with a bunch of smart people sitting in a room just knocking out bugs and making paychecks. I mean, this is some serious dough on the line. And this seems to be a new way that companies are utilizing to kind of get these bugs found and also entice hackers and things to fix the bugs versus just exploiting them. And that's kind of an interesting cause, basically giving people who look for these type of exploits a way to make money other than illegally on it.
I think that's the purpose of bug bounties, really.
Which is pretty cool.
If you've used Linux for any amount of time, then you've probably gone to install a printer. You know that HP by far has the best support for Linux out there. And HPLIP is the HP open source driver that they actually release and maintain on their site. And so if you're planning on getting a new printer or scanner, you might want to consider HP. So a new version of HPLIP is out. The HPLIP or HP Linux imaging and printer drivers have a new software release 3.19.11 that adds support to Ubuntu 19.10, Fedora 31, and the latest Manjaro. In addition, you get the latest job account support added for the whole new plethora of HP LaserJet printers included. Finally, you'll get support for HP UI Scan that allows devices to only scan the backside of a page. HP printers are well known throughout the community for having great driver support. Seeing more software along with additional printer driver support makes the decision on what printer to buy even easier. In fact, we deploy kiosks to hotels and small offices, and every time we do that, one of the things they always ask is we want a printer, and we have settled on the HP M40, I think it's 402, M402N. You literally, with HP printers, I'd say 85% of them, you just take them out of the box and plug them in, and they'll work out of the box. And the remaining 15%, you go to HP's open source driver page, which actually exists. And by the way, if you want a link to it, go to ultispeed.com, click on client resources, because we have it linked, of course. And download the HPLIP tool, and then all of the printers will work. And it's the kind of tool that you would expect on Mac OS or Windows, right? You install the HPLIP tool, you run it, it presents you with a little UI, and it says, "Hi, welcome to your printer. How is the printer connected? Is it over USB? Is it over Wi-Fi? Or is it a direct network connection? Okay, I want to connect directly to Wi-Fi. All right, let me search. Here are the available Wi-Fi networks. Connect to the printer. You connect to it. And it walks you through the entire process. It helps you set the name, helps you decide if you want to share the printer. It's a fantastic tool, to the point that when we were designing our kiosk system, the only requirement I gave to our developer when we were going through that process when we got to printers was I said it has to be HP. It has to be HP and it has to be networked. I also will point out that way back in the early 2000s, HP was the first company to come up with, they had their HP JetDirect, which was actually, I mean, the JetDirect came back out in the 80s, but in the late 90s and early 2000s, as Linux was starting to take off, they had strong ties into cups with the HP JetDirect, and so you can set up a network printer, and this 100% has worked out of the box without any drivers. If it's a network printer, you install the network printer, you give it an IP address, and you go into Linux. One of the options is connect to an HP JetDirect printer. Put that in, type in the model number, and Bob's your uncle. You have a printer on the network. So I'm really excited that HPLIP has a new release. This is definitely something I will be downloading, not just soon, but today. And I'll definitely be trying it at a number of our different clients and report back, because I'm confident this is going to be a really great thing for Linux. Ryan, what are your thoughts?
So what's really interesting is when I started on Linux, I remember the pure hatred and frustration with getting printers to work in
any
anything,
hardware.
but Ubuntu. Yeah. Ubuntu seemed to have this magical thing back then that now a lot of other distros are starting to show, but Ubuntu was the first I ever seen it in, where they could find your printer and you could just set it up by clicking add printer and be done. Every other distro, it was magical incantations upon terminals, upon cups, upon all of these things you were trying to do to please get the printer to work. And printers are a frustrating thing to begin with. Even in any operating system, they can be frustrating and annoying. I mean, there's a whole reason why there's that, scene in the movie where the guy's beating a printer with the bat, and that's his way of relieving stress. Everything changed for me. I have not had a complaint with a printer ever since I went to HP. There's an individual, I've never asked them if I could name them, so I'm not gonna name them, but they actually are in our Telegram group that works for HP. They were in playing Ballistic Overkill for me, with me one day, and they're like, hearing my frustrations. I had a Brother printer, which, by the way, a lot of people recommend in Linux to get Brother. I have not had great experiences. I tried 3.
I second that.
Yeah,
I second that. And if you do get them to work, they stop working later.
Yeah, I was on my 3rd one, and I was complaining about it while playing the game, and I still can't get the stupid printer to work right in Linux. It'll find it, print, and then the next time you reboot, it'll never find it again, or whatever was going on. He said, "Hey, I work for HP. They do a lot with open source. Get an HP printer." I got one. I have the M251 NW LaserJet, and it has just absolutely worked in every single distro, every time. No problems at all. It is the greatest feeling to be able to just hit print and know that it will print.
And in most cases, most cases HP just hook up the printer and it just works because it's built into the kernel stuff. And it's so nice. Like when they first announced this, it was like when I first got into Linux, there was like the printers was abysmal. It was like trying to get a printer to work was torture. But then HP announced that they were going to do that. They created this like campaign to make support for Linux, and for the past like 15, maybe 17 years or so, you could get an HP printer and it'll just work. So now at this point, every time I get a new printer, it's always an HP because I know that it's going to work without question, and I don't have to worry about making sure I get the drivers and stuff. Except for like that's saying that you're saying that there's occasionally like the new ones you still need to get their drivers from their website. But like I hooked up a 10-year-old printer and was like, I wonder if this works, and it did. So like it's fantastic.
Yeah. And it's because they invested in having their software in the kernel, as well as they have the separate software package to give you that nice GUI and things that you come to expect that tell you your ink's low or whatever, which in Windows and things is annoying, but the way they have it implemented in Linux, it's not at all. It only tells you those messages while you're printing, not just randomly popping up every 5 seconds. So your printer ink is low and stupid things like that other printer companies do. It's so well done. HP killed it. If you need a printer or scanner, believe me, trust me, save yourself the frustration, spend a little bit more money and get an HP.
Honestly, I would argue that HP's lower end is on price with Brother's
yeah, I would say they're
low
about
end.
the same
As
as
far as
Brother.
price, yeah, as far as price goes. Okay, so you can buy the M1118, which is a networked HP printer, for $91. I don't think Brother has a cheaper print. If you're looking for a LaserJet, which you should be looking for a LaserJet if you do the calculation on ink costs, it's cheaper to have a LaserJet, and you can do a multifunction machine for $168. So I don't. There's no excuse not to buy an HP. If you don't buy HP, you just don't love Linux.
There you go.
Okay.
Now that's an advertisement.
Okay, so now it's story time on Destination Linux. Let me set the scene for you. A number of years ago, and I haven't got a clue when, along came this wonderful thing called YouTube. And people flocked to it in the millions. Creators started creating websites and programs and everything that people wanted to watch. And hey, along came advertising, and they made a lot of money doing it. And there are probably people out there now who are millionaires because of Google. Then the Google accountants went, whoa, hang on a minute, boys, we're hemorrhaging money here. Let's create the ad apocalypse. And overnight, people's money revenue was reduced. They changed their algorithms and all sorts of things happened. Now, I truly believe Google have found another method of not paying creators on YouTube, and they are blaming the FTC. So along comes COPA, the Children Online Privacy Protection Act, and this was brought about by some child protection groups that wanted to protect their children and didn't like all of this metadata being collected. So COPA come along and said, okay, if a YouTube creator says that this YouTube video is aimed at children, you can no longer collect any metadata on them. You can't use it. It's just not done unless you go out and get the individual permission of the parents. Now, that's an impossible task. And there's been hundreds of videos from people out there coming up with their own theory as to why this is all happening. Okay. Now, this is just my theory that Google wants to stop paying people more money, because what they've done is they've taken what the FTC says and given you two options. Your video is either for children or it's not for children. If it's for children, your revenue will be dropped by 90% because you can't have all these ads. You can't have all this personal information coming through to you. If, however, you mark it as not for children, and some weird algorithm or somebody sitting in the FTC offices says, whoa, that's clearly aimed at children, you're nicked. Pay me $43,350. That is Google's version of what the FTC was saying. But I found a couple of videos by a gentleman who's an actual lawyer who first of all was complaining about all this, and then he got a phone call supposedly from somebody very high up in Google, and they found a clause that Google have completely ignored in this COPA regulation that says there is a middle ground. There might be a situation where somebody is making a video for adults, but it pertains, some part of it, to children. Now, that doesn't have to be affected by Google's draconian method of it either is or it isn't for children. Now, as I say, there are so many videos out there, and it is so frustrating for the average YouTube creator, and it's caused so many problems for people going, oh, that's it, I'm going to leave YouTube now. I can't afford to have this $42,000 fine. Why do we let Google get away with it time after time after time? Hopefully, the lawyers can get together, speak to the FTC, and get Google to change their mind. But this was the easiest way and the cheapest way for Google to say, no, it's down to the creator. We can't have anything to do with it. But all they had to do was adopt another method. And I just find it really frustrating that it's taken a week of headache and heartache and 50 video that I watched and pages and pages and pages of regulations for this one lawyer to get a phone call and then be told this is what Google have done deliberately. It's just ridiculous. So the good news out of this story is that the more Google mess up and YouTube mess up, the more likely that a second player will come in to challenge that monopoly. But in the meantime, people like you and me suffer.
Can I give you a slightly different take on it?
Yes, please.
Consider that what the advertiser wants to get out of advertising, right? They want people to go and buy their products or services. And so from Google's perspective, in order to deliver on the expectations of that particular form of their client and that particular revenue generation stream, then they have to pair the advertiser with somebody who's going to buy or sell their products. And so if a law comes into an existence that basically says, we don't want you marketing this, that, or the other to children, then it starts to limit the amount of advertisements that can be displayed to children, thereby limiting Google's ability to inject an ad or to introduce an ad into a younger audience. And so does it suck as a content creator? Yes, but I would suggest to you that it's not so much Google doesn't want to pay content providers for their money. Of course, I think that's probably true, but I would guess that the motivating factor there isn't so much that, because for every money that they pay the content producer, you can bet that they're probably making, it's probably like an 80-20 split. So they're making a lot of money. It's like selling Girl Scout cookies. I think they're taking in less money overall. I think that it's the function of, if you can't sell to children, then you can't make any money off of selling to children. And so if people are going to make videos for children, then they're going to have to do it out of the goodness of their heart, because children don't have any money. They don't have any purchasing power. They don't have any decision power. And so the government is trying to change the way that we encourage children to either spend money or talk to their parents about spending money. Is there any validity to that, or am I totally off base there?
No, for me, that's a perfectly valid route that you could take. My biggest complaint is, why didn't YouTube offer the creator the 3 options that the FTC, because everybody has painted the FTC as the bad guy here.
That's why.
And I don't think it is.
Yeah.
I think it's Google.
That's why. Because it allows them to attack the government, because the government's a big player, and it's easy to vilify a government. So that's our government agency.
Well, yeah.
Also, the COPPA Act was not even created by the FTC. It's a law that was passed by Congress, and they are the enforcers of that law. So
20 years ago as well.
Yeah, it was 1998 when they passed the law, and it was updated in 2013. So the issue is not that they don't want to give money. The fact is, like, YouTube wants to take as much advantage as they possibly can. So the COPPA law was actually changed to address these sorts of things online in 2013. And YouTube pretended that they're not involved whatsoever. And they pretended by saying that, hey, we don't allow children on our website. You have to be 13 years or older. That's why if you go to any website that says, hey, you're signing up, are you a 13 years or older? Is because if you are not, and you say that you are not, the COPPA is allowed, and the COPPA goes into effect. So if a child says that they are 13 or older, they're basically giving an out to the website. However, YouTube was really adamant about how they were not for children, even though it was obvious that they had millions of content, millions of minutes of content for children, specifically for children, for years. And there was even a case where YouTube made a advertising thing to go to different companies like Hasbro and other companies, and said, hey, this is how many children watch this content. We're the #1 children. It's like you are now telling people that you are acknowledging what you are, and that's what really started this whole process, because that came out, and then these advocacy groups went to the DOJ to get them to do something against YouTube, and they didn't do anything, so it went to the FTC. And then the FTC was like, they created a civil lawsuit towards YouTube saying that you are violating the COPPA, the act, which is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. It is not about an advertising to children issue. It's about taking information from children
exactly
and using that information. So
that's the whole
taking the
frustration
data yet again.
yes.
of this whole thing is that, when you go, Noah, you were talking about advertising making money. I think YouTube's doesn't make money at all for Google. In fact, I think it still loses money for them as a whole. Now, whether this is just when they say it loses money, some type of tax scheme or something else, I don't know. Because I mean,
Amazon also says they don't make much money from their stuff.
That they don't make money on this. But in any case, services like DuckDuckGo or your TV, when you're watching an ad, they don't know who is sitting there in that room watching the ad. So they create a general ad to target the audience of those who are going to watch it, to say, well, I know by running this ad during the Super Bowl, maybe I don't want 55-year-olds to see the ad. Maybe I'm targeting it to 16 to 18-year-olds, but I know 55-year-olds are going to have to watch it because there's nothing I can do about that. In YouTube's instance, they were taking data from kids, and other services were doing this as well, Google, browsing, everything else, taking all this data from kids, and then they were using that to specifically throw ads their way. I don't see how Google could still not make money by allowing ads to run on there unless they plan on running adult-only ads on YouTube, which I've never seen. So why couldn't you just allow regular ads to go through without collecting people's data? I know this is crazy. I know that the marketers out there are just like, their heads are exploding. But imagine if you didn't have the ability to steal people's privacy information and use it against them, if you just hoped your ad would run across the people that you wanted, and your product sells itself.
Well, I've got a question here for you. Sorry, on the data collection side of it. Yeah, Here I am as a dad, and I've sat down with my Android pad, and I've logged on to YouTube, and we're sitting there watching another dad with his kid playing a child's game. Whose data are Google collecting? Who did that 5-year-old sign on to that iPad with his Google account and his information? No, it's the parents. So how do they know they're collecting children's data?
Because they're collecting children's data, because parents do also give their kids devices that are specifically for those kids to use. Yes, the parent signed up for the account, but the kid is the one using it, and the kid is the only one using it. It's still more devious than that.
They grab so much information, Zeb, on you that because you sign up for services or accounts other places, and maybe there's some, I don't know, random survey or something that comes out from another company that you're interested in doing business with that says, how many kids are in your house? Oh, 2. What ages are they? Oh, 5 and 6. And then Google grabs that information, and then they fingerprint your browsing activities, so they know when it's probably you watching stuff and probably the 5-year-old in your house watching stuff. And then it even goes further than that, because then they know based on your purchases that go into your different email accounts and things, when you're most likely to buy a toy for your kid and when you're not. And it just keeps going on and on and on to the point where they're not guessing there's a 5-year-old in there. They know there's a 5-year-old sitting in your house. They know what that 5-year-old likes. They know what they watch. They know what they browse. They know what their emails are. They know when they get toys. They know when their birthday is. They know everything about them, probably more than their parents. And that's the problem where this law was trying to address. And YouTube basically did the typical nuclear option of, we're just going to wipe out revenue for anybody who does kid content out there. And there's a lot of people who made their living this way. But why I bring this up is we get a lot of people, and the reason why I wanted to put this article in here as well is we get a lot of people telling us, go to a different one of these other alternative video sites. Why aren't you guys on whatever random one pops up today? There's like 500 of them. And the answer is nobody watches the content there. We're on several. I have on my channel, YouTube channel specifically, I've at least used half a dozen of these alternatives that everybody swears by. Nobody is there to watch the stuff. And so, I hope that honestly, YouTube continues to do this stuff, because the only way to get people to go to those places is that YouTube basically has nothing left in it but business corporate-y videos that nobody wants to watch. And people start looking for the good old days of the internet and YouTube and look for an alternative service. But there are literally no good options out there. People will they'll talk them up like, oh my gosh, you've got to try BitChute. But there are just so many problems with these platforms. I'll put their video embedding links in and the videos won't play. They'll stutter. They don't work. The quality's terrible. It's just none of it is scalable yet. So that's why we're on them. Just nobody's there.
I mean, BitChute's probably one of the better ones, but it's not. There's issues. But we actually do have DL on BitChute if anybody wants to use that. But currently, there's like a couple dozen people that use it, so that's why it's not a focus. But also, that's just the case of like most of these platforms. There's not a lot of audience on these platforms because like a lot of people love the idea of decentralized platforms, and yes, that's good. But in some cases, it's not a very good viable option because there's PeerTube. People like you should use PeerTube, but PeerTube's not a service. PeerTube is a software that you can run yourself, but you have to market everything in that case still. So yes, there's like 300 or so, depending on like different languages and all kinds of stuff of different PeerTube instances. But they're all ridiculously small amount of quota that you have to use the files. So you have maybe 5 videos that you could put on it, and you could have maybe access to a couple dozen people in that particular instance. It's just not a viable option because decentralized in getting any kind of social network is a very, very difficult thing to do.
It just requires a massive amount of networking that would require a massive company behind it to pull off, unless somehow you can get this blockchain option to actually work effectively, which up to this point, any of the services that are using blockchain only half work half the time. And so it's just not effective. There was one big blockchain one, I don't remember, it was one of the dozen. And that was one of the ones where, well, if enough people aren't seeding the video when you first upload it, nobody gets to watch it.
Yeah, they'll just delete it. Yeah.
Just delete it. So, I mean, there's just too many problems compared with it. But I just hope YouTube keeps messing up. Every time I see one of these things come out, I'm like, yes, keep messing up so that there can be an alternative.
What's the next thing that's going to happen, though? Let's say we get 2 billion creators who suddenly decide, you know what, I've had enough with YouTube. I'm going to Twitch. Won't the FTC then tackle TwitchNet, or can you not make money on Twitch?
Absolutely.
No, it's 100%. It's because of their size, right? Everybody, and it's just like the BSD versus Linux conversation that we have, right? If you ever talk to the BSD guys, they'll say, "Oh, our community is so much less hostile and there's so much less drama." Yeah, because it's like, 1/1000th of the size of the Linux community. We got a lot more people, so obviously have a lot more resistance. Same thing holds true with content distribution networks. YouTube has all of the problems that they have because all the eyes are on YouTube. All the money is on YouTube. All the regulation is on YouTube. The second all of that stuff moves on to another centralized platform, we're going to have the exact same problem. And the problem, as Ryan so eloquently pointed out, with decentralized platforms are normal everyday people want one place to go to. You go to YouTube, not Google's instance of YouTube or John's instance of YouTube or the Destination Linux instance of YouTube, just YouTube, right? And until we get that down, we are trying to implement decentralization without considering the functionality and ease of use. And that's never going to get us anywhere.
Exactly.
Well, the main thing is that the COPPA law is applying to everyone, to every system. It's not just a focus on YouTube. It's just that YouTube violated it for so long that they're a huge focus from FTC. That's why they had a lawsuit in 2018. That's why YouTube settled for $170 million in September of this year. That's why they have to change all these things, because in order for the settlement, they had to settle with FTC and also do certain stipulations that the FTC required them to do. The thing is, they should have done this years ago, but they didn't because they wanted to make as much money as possible while knowing that they were violating the law. And that is the biggest issue, because they were fully aware in 2013 that there was tons of kids content. There were gigantic channels that were specifically just for making kid content. And now that's an ambiguous situation where the FTC wants to expand the COPPA language to be more like wide-reaching and more broad. And that's the problematic thing. So there's certain pieces where the FTC is doing something that's potentially bad, because they're, instead of doing child-directed, they're now doing a thing called child-attracted content. Whereas if you have something that is somewhat interesting to a child, then you have a problem. And that is the biggest issue, because of that creates a problem where family-friendly content is problematic. And that is crazy, because our content is not for kids, but there's kids could watch it with their family. They could be around in the
They
conversation.
could fill their brains and learn about Linux.
Exactly. So
I
even
disagree.
us, we could have an issue with it.
I agree with your take. I agree with your synopsis in the traditional business sense, but that's why I think decentralization is so important, and why, Ryan, you see people that go, "Oh, you have to check out X," because with decentralization, like, you can say all day long, "Hey, here's the thing that we have to have. Here are the rules, and it applies to everybody, and nobody's exempt." But honestly, when push comes to shove, where the rubber meets the road, how do you enforce, content guidelines, over PeerTube, for example, right? Like, which PeerTube instance are you going to go after? The largest one? Some of them?
You would
If they're
contact
truly
PeerTube themselves and make them put it in the software.
Well, but I'm just saying, so it's open source. So then somebody forks it and takes it back out. I mean, you can't
True.
force you can only force the behavior. You can't actually force the code change in a decentralized instance, right? So you can go after the large players that are running the software and have them force them to implement that feature, and that might be moderately successful. But you'll never actually. It's like trying to put regulations on torrenting, right? Like, how are you going to do that? You can go ahead and, like, you can say you're going to do it. You can make it illegal. You can write a law in the books. But there's no real way to enforce it. And I think what's interesting about that, and what is so liberating about that, is even if it has somewhat of a downside, because I have kids and I want them to stay safe online, even if there is a downside associated with that liberty, associated with that freedom, it is so refreshing that we are starting to enter a world in which people are starting to take control back of their technology, and we can put all the laws we want on the books, and they're essentially unenforceable. And so what we have to do is then go to the community and say, okay, how can we fix this problem in a community fashion, rather than a top-down, the government decided, now everybody has to do it approach. And I think overall that would be more successful. I don't know that I don't know without ease of use that we ever get there.
Well, if the problem is, and you nailed it, Noah, is they create a product that they decentralize something, but then it's inferior. It's never better.
Right.
Not never, but in this case,
very rarely.
Alternatives, it's not
Torrents
better.
are better.
And
Torrents
so,
are better than
yeah,
HTTP
absolutely.
downloads. Yeah.
But my point with YouTube specifically is these alternatives are not better. And
no, they suck.
And one of the biggest problems is one you mentioned, which is there's no catalog that brings it all together. People want to go to YouTube and just search around and get lost in videos. They don't,
right.
like you said, want to go to Dan or Bob or Joe's different.
And keep track of Dan and Bob and Joe and where I saw this and where I saw that.
Exactly.
Right.
You just want one place. And if they can fix that, and it wasn't this an issue with Flatpaks taking it to a different step, Michael, where, initially they were kind of spread out everywhere because it was decentralized, but then they brought FlatHub in, which brought it all kind of together where, yes, it's still broken up, but you have one place to search.
Well, I mean, the Flatpaks are different because the FlatHub itself is not a part of Flatpak, and that's still a problem, but it has become like the community de facto centralized repo for it. Because everybody's like, hey, you know what would be really good about with Flatpaks? Having a repo that's centralized that everybody could go to find the things, because that's how getting software works, because we already have the system of repos for individual distros. You have one repo to get to. Now you have this new system that you could have thousands, and you have no idea where everything is. So having FlatHub is a very fundamental thing, but it isn't technically a part of the Flatpak project. So at some point that could go away. We don't know. Decentralized and centralized both have massive pros and cons. There is neither one of them are the best option. So that's the biggest problem.
Okay, so consider this for a moment. Look at Signal. Signal is one of those applications that it may not technically be decentralized. In fact, when I say technically, I mean it's literally not decentralized. But Signal does a thing that the way that they handle encryption and the exchange of keys means that they don't ever compromise on actual security. And yet, as far as the user's concerned, it's literally no different than any other messaging platform, than iOS, whatever the text or whatever it's called, and Telegram and those kinds of things. What that means is that with just a little bit of thought and a little bit of sweat equity, we could create a system. Technology exists to create a decentralized system. So, for example, you could have a federated, and we're working on that, right, with various different social protocols. But we could hone those protocols in such a way that it becomes part of a central decentralized network. And so, if you search for a particular movie, it doesn't matter which instance it's on, it already finds it. And we just have to hone that. The basics are already there. We've already kind of started that. We just haven't we just haven't dialed it in to the point that it's super easy and that anybody can just one-click deploy, and now they have an instance, right?
And what's so interesting is it seems like, Noah, they've created all of the hard parts of creating a YouTube alternative, but don't finish what I think would be the easier part, which is okay, create a search function where it just searches.
Talks together.
Yeah.
Exactly.
They do all the hard work, but not the last part.
And the other thing is one thing I also think would be extraordinarily helpful that I've seen very implemented very, very successfully numerous times is a dual model. Bitwarden is the first thing that comes to mind. If you say to yourself, I want to own my own passwords. I have all of these things. I've got everything set up. Okay, I want to do this. Okay. All right. How do I get started? Well, I don't want to spin up a Bitwarden server because I don't have time to do that, right? Well, guess what? You can just go to bitwarden.com, sign up for an account, and you can use it. And then after 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, after you realize it's for you, then you can go ahead and spin up your own instance. And now it's still, it's still working or whatever. Now get this. My wife comes out and says she wants to do it. I put her on my instance, but then Joe down the street, I'm not putting Joe on my instance, but I can tell Joe, just go over to Bitwarden and sign back up, right? Bitwarden then becomes a drop-in replacement literally for KeePass, and yet it doesn't compromise on it's not as a service, you can still own it yourself. And so if I'm just going to pick on PeerTube, for example, if PeerTube got to a point where I could go to peertube.com and all of the videos on the PeerTube that were listed as maybe federated, I could just go to peertube.com and search for video and it would show up and all those things worked. And then if I could set up an instance and I just say public to PeerTube, public to federated, and then anybody's instance, collects, now we have a workable model, because now we can just tell people, go to peertube.com. That would be a way. And as you said, technically speaking, that's not the difficult part.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So one final question, bringing it back to YouTube. With all this hoo-ha that's going on, and with the word finally getting out that this is just a draconian way that YouTube are going to be applying the law, will they change their mind? Will they go back to having a better option of, is it for kids, is it for general, or is it for adults?
Unlikely, because they're not doing it because it's to help the creator. They're doing it to cover themselves, because they are the ones being sued. So if they can pass the responsibility off to the creators, that allows them to pull away from it completely. And that's why everybody's freaking out of the $42,000 fine, because it's going towards creators, because YouTube pushed it away from themselves. And by by making it a simple yes or no, are you for kids or are you not for kids? Making it a yes or no puts an ambiguous situation where it makes a ton of confusion and takes them out of the position. And that is that's the worst part about what YouTube is doing, is that they are just being ambiguous for this fact. And also, if you do choose to say that you are for kids, then you have a situation where you have so many features removed from your account. Like you can't have notifications, you can't get subscriptions, you don't have comments anymore. You have so many things stripped out, just so almost no one is going to select it because of how drastic it is, if they can avoid it. Now, there are certain cases where some people are creating content for both, a full general audience, but sometimes these videos are specifically for kids. They can go in and choose that this is a for kids video for that particular one, but there's no incentive for them to do it, because essentially 60 to 70% of the ad revenue is removed, because the ad revenue is mostly through the personalized 90%. Ads. They're saying that, if you remove that, you still can get ads, but it's more general ads, and those don't get as much percentages. The click-through rate is not as good. So that's why that they have this situation. So the adpocalypse is a whole different thing that wasn't really YouTube's fault. This is kind of YouTube's fault, because they refused to acknowledge the law in 2013. They spent years pretending that they weren't what they are. And now that they finally are doing it, the only reason they ever decided to admit it was so they could get more money, and then that backfired and made the FTC sue them. So it's in this particular instance, it's YouTube's fault. Mm-hmm. There was also some lawyers. There was a lawyer who went and talked to the FTC because of this situation, and he found out that they weren't even aware that the content creators would be affected by this whatsoever. So it creates this weird situation where the FTC does need people to send messages and let them know about what you need to research the topic to let them know that you're informed and everything. but you need to send them a message to FTC to make sure that they're not expanding the thing, just enforcing it properly. And also, hopefully there's a way to contact YouTube and tell them to stop being awful, because there's a general audience exemption in the COPPA Act that YouTube is ignoring, and that's the biggest issue. So if we were able to somehow get YouTube to add the general audience, it would be fine.
So, Ryan, help us out here. Dig us out of this big hole. Tell us some great news.
So Linux kernel 5.4 is being released today. As we're recording this, we have, and we talked in episode 142 about some of this. So, but as we're recording this, it's out there right now. Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 support, new AMD and Intel GPU supported, Intel Ice Lake Thunderbolt support, drones we talked about being in 5.4, exFAT support, of course, coming in for those who want it. Improvements in Wine and Proton are there, as well as in addition to FS Crypt improvements. So a lot came in 5.4, but that's already dropped. So now it's time to look at what's coming in the new version 5, which will be released, the first kernel version, in 2020. And looking at what is already going into 5.5, I am really excited about this kernel version. So live patching will now track system states, which means it will have a huge improvement in how patching is handled starting in kernel 5.5. System 76 has dropped some ACPI driver code in there for their upcoming Coreboot, which we talked about, enabled laptops that are dropping. They also, by the way, System 76 announced they're going to be making their own laptops next year. So that's some exciting news to kind of go along with that Coreboot stuff. You have Intel Optane DC persistent memories getting support. Lots of graphic card improvements in there for Intel and for AMD. And AMD is dropping in overdrive overclocking support for their Navi lineup. So if you're into overclocking and things, you're going to love kernel 5.5. And you're on AMD. Improved power management for NVIDIA and Intel hybrid laptops. So this is a big complaint for a lot of people who have hybrid laptops, is the power management is terrible, and that will be fixed there. ext4 encryption improvements, Intel CPU power management, new hardware dropped in there. This is something we've been talking about this show all year. It's a common theme. These new kernels, not only for all the older hardware that's already out there getting a bunch of improvements, but all the new hardware enablement that comes in these later kernels, including Logitech keyboards, which you might get something like that for Christmas, or be in the market for a new keyboard and want to have that support built in, where you're not trying to do some incantations in the terminal to get things to work. It's all going to be built into the kernel. Wi-Fi drivers, additional new Wi-Fi drivers are being added to this kernel, and Huawei laptop support. So whether you're on old hardware, new hardware, it doesn't matter. Kernel 5.5 is looking awesome. But I think the big thing here to highlight is that Linux is becoming more plug and play than ever before, because of the fact that so many hardware manufacturers are throwing their support into the Linux kernel and putting their drivers directly into it. And that, to me, is just so exciting to see.
I mean, absolutely. I can't wait to get the new hardware stuff support, because it's going to be a lot more people interested in using Linux, because they can actually use it on certain hardware that they have, especially the different features of getting the new AMD support, new Optane support from Intel. Like, there's so many things that every time a new version of Linux kernel comes out, there's always something that is just something that you don't necessarily wanting specifically, but you see there's so much value and benefit that they're taking into consideration. So it's always awesome to see every time they come in, because no matter what, even if you bring out the latest version of 5.4 and then you look at what's coming in 5.5, you're like, yes. Even if it's not even out yet, you see the next version of okay, that's awesome, and the next version, that's awesome. It's a weird thing that it's kind of it's a weird way to describe it. I guess it's like a kid in a candy store. So Linux is the software version of candy.
Yeah, I mean, it used to not be honestly that exciting when a new Linux kernel came out. There'd be some kind of big technical jargon thing of reconfiguring something, and you're just like, okay, cool. I mean, I'm glad they're working on it. But now with all of the hardware being dumped into it, every single release,
yeah,
to me, I don't know if I've just gotten geekier or not, probably both, but it just seems way more exciting to look at what's going on in the kernel than ever before.
Yep. So up first in the gaming section is some really interesting news, and it's related to Valve's Half-Life series, and that there's a new Half-Life game coming. It's not technically Half-Life 3, though, because Valve still can't count to 3.
Wait a minute, Michael. Stop. This is the opportunity that gamers have been waiting on, and you can't just do this for like 15 years. You have to say Half-Life 3 confirmed. You have to.
Right, but we're talking about a new version of Half-Life that isn't actually Half-Life 3, so I have to specify.
Darn it.
Because they still can't count to 3, and that's the issue, really. But Valve's new game is actually called Alex. I'm assuming that's how you pronounce it. But it's a third game from the series of Half-Life, but not. It's in between 1 and 2, technically speaking. So, like chronologically, it's in between 1 and 2.
This was smart on their part not to release Half-Life 3, because no matter what, people would have hated on it.
There's way too much expectation
for 15 years.
Yeah, and so there's it's also a VR game, so it's specifically for VR only. So if you have any VR headsets like the Index or whatever, you can play this game when it comes out next year. But this it looks like a really interesting approach that they're doing, like taking an existing franchise and putting into it a VR style game. I think that's pretty interesting to see what happens with that. But there is a little bit of an issue in that it is not confirmed for Linux users yet. They said that they are working on support for Linux users, but it's not confirmed to have it yet, so that's why it doesn't list it in the announcement. It is being developed for Linux, but we don't know if it's going to have day one yet, because they might get it done by the time they actually do the release, but it might not. It might be later on, so we don't know. But it is pretty cool overall, and I am glad that.
Have you seen the graphics of this thing?
Well, I mean, I've seen the demo. It's ridiculous.
Noah, you have been talking about VR, your interest in VR, getting a VR headset and all of that. Yep. I have looked at all of these VR games, really anticipating this thing to take off. Now, we had a discussion a while back where I was saying, I'm a bigger believer that AR is going to be the thing that breaks out, not VR, because VR just seems like it never really went anywhere. And a lot of that happens to be because when I watch these VR games, they're cool, they're awesome, but they're usually really short games, and the graphics are they're not impressive, and they're just weak. This is the first game that I've seen in the VR world that I've personally seen that just blew me away. Like, this is next gen. You look like you are in Half-Life. You're doing things like with the guns and loading and things that just make you feel like you're really in that world. And this blew me away. And I think with your new Ryzen build that you finally got going there, this might be the one for you to pick up here and try out, especially if we want to see what the capabilities fully are of VR. But you've got to take a look at some of these videos, Noah, because I know you're excited about VR.
I'm excited about VR. The other thing is I'm excited that anytime I can support efforts on Linux, even if I'm not a gamer, people always assume that I don't care about gaming stuff on Linux because I'm not it's not my chosen form of entertainment. That's not true, right? I like supporting a continuation of development on Linux because I understand that means that there's going to be more eyes on Linux and more people using it. And so anytime there's advancement, that to me in and of itself, the principle is important to me. And also, at some point, I really would like to start getting into the Destination Linux gaming network.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So the question then, is this going to be the game that makes VR, or will it just be one notch on the ladder?
Let me put it this way. When I say that this game has been anticipated in the gaming community for 15 years, I can't think of another game more anticipated ever because of the fact that it was such a hit and it just made sense. Certainly, Valve is going to come out with Half-Life 3 or a continuation or something along the series, and they haven't. And I think it got to a point where it became a meme and there was just so much annoyance to Gabe probably about Half-Life 3 coming. And then he knew at this point that the expectations for it would be so high, it would be impossible to ever deliver a product that would meet what Half-Life 3 is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And so I think this was an interesting move on Valve's part, because you take the most anticipated game probably ever, or at least memed ever to be anticipated, and one of the greatest game series of all time from a first-person shooter standpoint. And you basically make it a VR exclusive. So if there is anything that was going to push people to VR, it would be this. But keep in mind, it's going to cost you $1,000 worth of equipment to play one game. So, now the new kits do come with this game. So I noticed that on Steam site. That if you pick up one of their $1,000, $999 VR kits, that it comes with Alex. So that's kind of cool. At the same time, is this going to be the thing that pushes them over the edge? I have a hard time believing there's that many people out there that are going to drop $1,000 on a VR headset
on a game,
for this.
I wouldn't do it for that purpose just because I'm super cheap. But if I would be really tempted if the next version of Portal was also a VR game, because that would be awesome. Because they have Portal 1 and 2, but they don't have Portal 3 yet. Valve can't count to 3, because they have Portal 2, Left 4 Dead 2, still don't have 3 of that. Like I think every game they make, they stop at 2.
Yeah,
I think that this game has potential. I think this is probably the best one they could have chosen to get people to consider going into, using it because of how much it's been memed and how much people want to play this game. However, I'm not one of those people because I've actually never played any of Half-Life games.
Oh my gosh, kick him off the podcast.
So,
Goodbye.
So maybe I could do like a game stream and people could laugh at how terrible I am at a game.
Well, we're hiring for a fourth host now that Michael has admitted that publicly. So if anyone's interested, send your applications to comments at Destination Linux.
Wouldn't it be really cool to see a first reaction to a playing Half-Life? I think that's an option. There you go. See?
Well, we need to do that. And probably Noah hasn't played it either, I'm guessing. So we need to have both of you do a intro.
I know this will come as a shock to you, but no. I've not played that
I think
game.
I've got about 8 minutes with it, so there's 3 of us. You're on your own next week, Ryan.
I'm so disappointed.
Okay, so as Ryan was saying, he's looking for 3 new co-hosts on Destination Linux. The Google Stadia has officially launched, and everybody is not really that excited. Here's the thing. It's a typical Google release with the UI that's missing a lot of core functions, some of the things that they advertised, and a strange reliance on a mobile app to do things like purchasing games. So the console quality claim is getting eaten alive with noticeable lag and stuttering, along with people stating that it looks more like 720 than a full HD, and that's because Google auto-adjusts, so you never really know what version of the game that you're actually launching. And since lag was everyone's fear, it's worth noting that even those with fiber optic connections to their home and gigabit speeds are getting 80%, 280% response time lag between comparable in-home machines to the Stadia server, even with the same settings as Stadia. And so if this wasn't enough, you'll get a dismal amount of titles that you'll need to pay $60 for, as well as your $130 purchase of, and then the $9.99 a month pro fee to enjoy. Ryan, I just have to ask, is this an abysmal failure for Google?
I mean, it's certainly launched that way, and I have to tell people, especially the ones that send us the angry other emails otherwise, we told you so. We told you so. You said we were wrong. You said, oh, we're just hating on Google. No, I think it really wasn't just about the fact that it's Google, although certainly with their privacy practices and things, they're an easy target to pick on. All of us asked the same question. It's the same question everyone in the technical industry was thinking the moment this thing was launched. How are you going to deal with lag? People do not have internet connections on a large scale that are reliable enough, and those that do generally have data caps, and it's just the market is so small. How are you going to overcome that? And the answer is they didn't. There are reports of overheating. There are hardware issues. Google's denying this. Gamers Nexus, for instance, had to sit on hold for 3 hours just to get one question answered, just to show you we know how bad Google's customer support is. I mean, this is no surprise, but imagine having this brand new game system and you can't get anybody on the phone when you're having
And didn't I also read that people were getting these game boxes, but not having the initiation code to get it all set up?
That's correct. Yes. A lot of people couldn't even get their system started, so they were expected to sit on that hold. And by the way, this is just those waiting on hold for 3 hours. This isn't massively out. These are the people who signed up for the creators kit only calling in. Imagine when this thing if this thing had taken off like they expected and there were millions of people out there, Google didn't scale anything from a support standpoint to handle this. In addition, all of this lag, 280% response time lag, it is big. There are games, obviously, that lag is not as critical, so you might be able to get away with it. We all knew this was going to be a thing, but you're having this lag with the limited amount of people that are on it now. When this is mass produced, and let's say you had millions of people sitting on those servers, it's only going to get worse, not better. So if you can't
actually shoot Michael, go and make a cup of tea and see whether or not he shot me back.
Yeah, exactly. Well, some people are saying, and I haven't been able to confirm this, that Google somewhere put that they are actually trying to adjust. So if you have really good lag, and Zeb, you have really good lag and I have terrible lag, then they're basically adjusting the game so that it
both got bad.
So that it kind of brings them together, the lag together. So this is slowing some people down just so that they can play with you to begin with. Now, I haven't confirmed that. I've just seen people talking about that, but it makes logical sense they would try to do something along those lines. One writer said, they nailed the impossible and failed the possible. Google has delivered high-quality game streaming with minimal problems, but in almost every other respect, the company's approach is baffling. For instance, your Pro plan for $9.99 a month includes only 2 games. 2 games. That's it. Destiny 2 and some showdown type thing. So you're paying $9 a month for a whole 2 games. Now, there are other people who are in Microsoft's competition for this Google Stadia, which is called xCloud right now. It is in beta. They have over 50 titles already in beta, and they are saying that it is a far, far superior product to what Google has released here. But, this is what we said it was going to be. It looks like it's going to be a failure, and Google will probably drop this thing the second, they catch on to the fact that nobody wants this, and they'll kill it like they kill everything else.
Google doesn't do that.
I'm going to start buying shares in the Google Graveyard website.
So the software spotlight this week is something that it's been around for a very long time. It is pretty much a fundamental piece of software that we, not really talked about that much. And that's kind of we wanted to give it a little bit of a spotlight because it has been like very important thing. And it's kind of funny that, it doesn't get that much attention. And that is the Synaptic Package Manager. So Synaptic Package Manager is a piece of software that allows you to install packages from your distro repository in a really easy way. And it was created by the Debian project, and this is a piece of software that is pretty much fundamental for decades now. Maybe not fully decades, but a long time. And it's one of those things that makes it a lot easier to get various different packages, whether you want to get developer packages, where you want to get source file or source packages, where you want to get 32-bit or 64-bit. It makes it a lot easier rather than having to go into your command line and actually running it. It's essentially like the package manager before app stores existed. And so it's more of like a legacy thing. And it does kind of look like a legacy thing, but it is very valuable in the same thing as well. And if you have a new Pinebook Pro like Ryan did, it actually comes pre-installed by default, so it'll help you install software that way because Pinebook Pro comes with Debian as their base distro. And there's also other tools that are similar, like this is a GTK based application, but if you want a Qt based application, Muon Package Manager is the same kind of thing for Qt based users. So they're both very fundamental pieces of software. If you like the style of installing packages from the command line, but you want to have a way to search the packages repository, you can use these software tools to do that.
Yep.
Our tips and trick this week is something that's a little bit out of the norm. You may wonder why I'm holding a handful of dice and a stack of hard copy.
You're about to play Dungeons and Dragons.
No, I'm not.
Oh.
I'm about to generate the world's most secure password. Computers have gotten really good at figuring out how humans create passwords. And worse yet, humans are terrible at what we call entropy. Entropy being essentially randomness. And so there's a number of different ways that people have come up to try to introduce entropy. The problem is when you generate a 64 true random password, it's great, it's completely secure, and also completely and entirely impossible to remember. So that's where a concept of dice words comes in. Now, dice words works like this. You can do it with a single die, or you can use 5 if you want to do it a little bit faster. And you sit there and you roll the 5 dice, and so you'd get a series of numbers. So the number I got was 1, 1, 6, 5, and 3. So if I take the number 11653 and I go over to my dice words list, which you can download off the internet, 11653 is alone, the word alone. And so you'll do that same process 7 to 9 times, and you'll come up with 9 easily rememberable phrases or words, excuse me. And you put that meaningless phrase together, and you will have a very, very secure password that's very, very easy to remember. And because it's all generated offline, there's no chance of any sort of electronic interception. And if you want to get really crazy and paranoid about it, use the on-screen keyboard so that no hardware keyloggers can log your keystrokes. And of course, if it's even more secure, use an on-screen keyboard and use it as an air-gapped computer so nothing can touch that machine.
Now, did you watch the movie Noah Citizen 4?
Yes.
So there's a scene in there which Edward Snowden basically takes this sheet and he puts it over his head to type his password into the laptop. And this is somebody obviously whose whole life was based on security and so when people think, oh, you're being too paranoid to go out there and do some offline approach to generating a password, probably not paranoid enough, honestly.
It depends. It depends on what your threat model is. I get people all the time. Clients ask me, anytime we do security consulting, clients ask, what is secure enough, right? And that answer, that's like walking into a hardware store and looking around and the sales guy comes up and says, what can I help you with? And saying, I want a good tool. Okay, but do you want a hammer? Do you want a saw? Do you want to cut? I mean, what do you want to do? So when we talk about security, there is no one size fits all approach. You have to look at what your threat model is. If you live in a rural house in 70 miles from the nearest civilization and your security apparatus is you're worried about the government, you have a very different security model and different security practices than you're going to have if you live in a 500 apartment complex in Houston and you're worried about your dubious neighbors who like to break in and steal things in the other apartments throughout the complex, and you're kind of worried that they're going to take your stuff, right? In one case, you would be putting a blanket over your head because you never know if there are cameras hidden in the wall, something like that. In our 500 apartment complex in Houston, essentially what you're doing is just making sure that it has a difficult enough password to guess that they're going to bang on it a couple of times and eventually hawk your stuff. It depends on what your model is. It depends on what your threat model is. And so the nice thing about Diceware is if you use KeePassX, which you should be using if you are if you're an open source and Linux advocate, if you're using something like KeePassX, it actually has a Diceware generator built in that you can use passphrases. So I would just encourage people to get into the standard practice of using Diceware. The other thing I would encourage people to do, no matter what your threat model is develop routine good security models. And that would not include things like putting a sheet over your head, because the reality is you're not going to sit out at a coffee shop and put a sheet over your head. The reality is that there are cameras
now
in
I feel silly.
Well,
yeah. Some people
should.
might not do that.
You guys are something else. Listen, Michael, the sheet isn't getting you anything, okay? Let me show you how my Linux distro can crack wide open your Windows box. It's not
How dare you?
your time.
How dare you?
But no, I mean, realistically, but simple things that you can do, right? If you touch type and you know where the keys are, don't sit there wide open, leaning back, at the coffee shop typing. Close the lid a little bit. Give yourself give your hands some privacy as you're typing the password. Maybe lean over the keys a little bit so your body is immediately before it, so there's nothing behind you. There are small things you can do that don't look like, you're not sitting there in the coffee shop, like this, and people are looking at you and going, "What is he doing?" Sorry, just had to authenticate my.
If I see anybody doing that, I'll just know they run Linux. You know.
Yeah, exactly.
You just typed password as your password. I saw it.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, there's the important, and the thing is, and I actually mentioned this at the security presentation I gave. If you're looking for where your threat model is lacking, then just look at how you would compromise yourself. What things could you think of if you wanted to get to your own data? How would you go about breaking into your own system? And approach it from that perspective. And where you start to see problems, then patch them.
Yep.
Well, what's interesting is if you take this down to a smaller scale, and for people who are not convinced about, doing these extra steps for security,
I don't understand.
How many times have you sat there and you're sitting behind somebody in line and they swipe their ATM card, and the pad is either facing you or the clerk, or it's one of those stretch ones and they just leave it on the table and they type in their PIN. It's actually fun for me to sit there and look at what people's PINs are, because so many people actually have more of a cultural fear of looking weird by hiding it than they do of somebody stealing their PIN. Isn't that weird? Like, they don't want to look like, oh, I don't care if anybody knows my PIN's 11111. Right. I'm just going to do it right here out in the open to everybody. Right. There needs to be, and then when you're the one who grabs the keypad and kind of like, gets it out of everybody's angle, people look at you like, look at that freak trying to hide his PIN.
It's funny. I've never gotten that look with PIN pad, but I'll tell you something. I have gotten some negative reactions to. When I walk out to my car, one of the things that I do is I verify threats inside of it. I'm not getting into a moving vehicle without making sure there's nobody in it. And so one of the things I'll do as I'm back, probably, 60, 70 feet, I'll just kind of look down and look under the car and just make sure there's nobody there. And then as I approach the car, I look through the back windows and and then I just get in and go. And more than once, I've been with somebody and they'll say, "What are you looking for?" "Just checking underneath the car." "Why? You afraid the boogeyman's under there?" I'm like, "No, afraid somebody who wants to rob me is under there." "I don't know. I'm not really afraid. Why would I not look?" Like you said, why is it so weird just to like cover your hand when you enter the PIN? Why is it weird to look to see if there's anybody under the car? Why is it weird to close the laptop lid so somebody doesn't see the password that you're using to secure your stuff? I don't get it.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before. People need to actually challenge this stuff, and it's not only just security but privacy as well. I've talked about how many times I go into a doctor's office. The one question they want you to fill out in the form is, give your social security number. Mm-hmm. I've never done it. I've never been questioned about it. I've never been asked about it. I just leave it blank. Question, just because somebody in a position of authority says they want something doesn't mean they get it. Every time I go to a cash thing and they're like, "What's your phone number before we'll ring you out?" No. I'm not going to give you my phone number. This is how this is going to work. I'm going to give you money. You're going to give me the product and I'm going to walk out the store.
Exactly.
This is the end of our deal.
Or I just, the other thing I'll do is I'll just make it up. 701-775-1111. Is that your phone number? I don't know. I don't know whose phone number it is. You said you asked for phone number. I'm not giving you my phone number because I don't want to call from you and I don't want to call you. So I just made up a phone number. Like, you know what I mean?
I went to a place that was like, I went to a place to get like some work on my car, and they were like, "Hey, what's your address?" Like, no, not doing that.
So a big thank you to each and every one of you for supporting us by watching or listening to Destination Linux. However you do it, we want to thank you for continuing to support us. Just this week, we're well over 1,100 Telegram users in our group, making it one of the largest Linux groups out there. We talk about the importance of networking, getting to know people. Telegram and things are a great way to do that. But also you can become a patron of the show and get to hang out with us after the show and get to hear all of the antics and fun things that go on, along with all the perks and tiers of being a patron. And we've also just joined Sponsus. So we're getting rid of Ko-fi because Noah could never pronounce it correctly. So we just decided to get rid of it. And we've moved on to Sponsus. So if you're a Ko-fi member now, please switch over to Sponsus soon. We really like working with Sponsus. They are very agreeable to changes and things that we want to make the platform easier and more usable. And additionally, others want alternatives to Patreon. So that's our alternative that we're going to use. So if you're a patron, stay there. If you want something different, go check out Sponsus with all of our perks there. But either way, whatever you're on, these services are darn near free. You get a fantastic behind the scenes look into the show, and you get to support the content here on the Destination Linux Network.
Speaking of support, like Spoonsys, Become a part of the community by going to destinationlinux.network and joining our forums Mumble server. And there's a lot of brain power there. And so if you can join us in that network, we'd love you to do that. If you can't find a way to participate with us, then you're not trying hard enough, because literally, if you can think of it, we have it. And that's all thanks to Michael. He doesn't do much else, but he does create everything.
There you go. Not much else, but everything.
Absolutely. So please get back to us and provide some feedback or ask any questions that you have. There are numerous methods that you can do to achieve this. You can do an email at comments@destinationlinux.org, our Telegram group, our Discord, our Discourse, Twitter, Mastodon, and lots of other ways that Michael has given to you at destinationlinux.org/contact. So please keep your comments coming and your questions. We love to read them. And as you heard from the 3 that we had today, we had some good discussions regarding those. So finally, don't forget to join our Mumble server, chat with the community, set up gaming sessions yourself, and enjoy networking.
If you want some more content from us, the fun doesn't stop here. We have our own channels you can check out. First, you can go to destinationlinux.network to get access to everything. But if you want to check out Ryan, you can go to youtube.com/DasGeek, where he'll fill your brains on hardware, software, and all things Linux. You can check out Zeb, where he does his Zebedee Gaming YouTube channel at youtube.com/ZebedeeBoss. You can find my Linux News podcast that is a weekly in-depth podcast called Linux This Week in Linux. And you can find other Linux-related content at tuxdigital.com. Or you can check out Noah's weekly talk radio show at 6 p.m. Central on Tuesdays. You can join him and he'll answer your Linux and text questions on the AskNoahShow.com. And also be sure to like that smash button and share the show on social media.
So everybody have a great week. And remember that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.